everybody, and welcome to the H&M Trucking Podcast, episode 69, and I'm your host, Marcus. Nice. So, what do we got going on today? Well, first of all, I want to thank you guys for last week's episode. It was a lot of fun. You can't make this stuff up. We're definitely bringing that one back later on. For the most part, everything made it through editing. We didn't get sanctioned. I didn't get my hand slapped. Well, I got a verbal hand slapping, but it was more just for like towing the line than it actually was for crossing it. So if you haven't listened to episode 68 yet, you need to back it up and go take a listen because it is wonderful. I mean, it's just fantastic. I had so much fun making the episode that it got me to thinking like, man, we should probably always do this. And then I was like, no, we got more important stuff to do. We have things that we need to focus on, things like safety, things like, just company culture and all that. But I will tell you right now that you can't make this stuff up. We'll make another appearance on the podcast sometime in the future. I am pulling to make that a recurring segment for sure. So thanks to everybody who took part in that last week. Thanks to everybody who listened and downloaded the episode. And for those of you that are listening thinking, I got a story that would fit perfectly in that episode, hold on to it because I will definitely make some time for you later on in the future. Can't wait for the next one of those to come around. What are we getting into today? Well, we are going to talk a little bit about the safety side of things today. Episode 69 has to deal with speeding because Eve told me, Eve's my little bird on my shoulder that tells me everything I need to know, and she told me that there has been quite a few speeding violations lately. She said that there have been some in the 6 to 10 range, which doesn't hurt as bad as the 11 to 14 over range. So 3 violations here as of late in the 11 to 14 over area. And there's actually more than that in the 6 to 10 range. But as I said, the 11 to 14 range hurts worse and shows up. So we are going to bring on Safety Director Dean Edmunds, and we're also going to bring on VP of H&M Trucking, Dale Cook, to talk to us about this, give us some tips on how to maybe mitigate this a little bit, and talk about what it means for the company, for the CSA score, what happens if we don't clean this up. It's a great conversation. Dale and Dean always have a lot of really good information, so I'm really looking forward to that one coming up just around the corner here. But first, we got a little bit of breaking news to get to. We're going to freight waves for this first one, with the dust starting to settle after the landmark Supreme Court Chevron decision upended the federal rulemaking process. Republican lawmakers are eager to hear about rules that small business truckers would like to see challenged. Here's a quote. "I think that first and foremost is the speed limiter rule that's been floated around," said Louis Pugh, Executive Vice President of the Owner-Operator Independent Drivers Association, otherwise known as OIDA. He was testifying before the House Transportation Infrastructure Committee on Wednesday. The rule, which the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration is looking to cap, potentially as low as 60 miles an hour for trucks, is scheduled to be published by the FMCSA next year. The quote continues, "Also, more flexibility in the hours of service rules would be very helpful, and eliminating the Department of Labor's overtime exemption for driver pay," Pugh said. That was put in place in 1938. Truckers right now give away 20 to 30 hours on average a week due to trucking companies being exempt from having to pay drivers overtime. He says that would also help manage the speed and other safety-related issues we're talking about here. So with hours of service and the overtime pay exemption, what Mr. Pugh here is saying is that, hey, if you don't basically make a driver exempt from earning overtime, then they're probably not going to speed because then they know that they'll actually get paid for the time that they're driving and so on. The article continues to say, with the Supreme Court's overturning of the Chevron doctrine, lower courts no longer have to defer to regulatory expertise or lack of it in legal challenges of regulations that agencies have interpreted from congressional statutes that are considered unclear. Here's another quote. Just in the past 2 years, we've seen some ridiculous rules come down from the Department of Transportation and other agencies, including speed limiters for trucks and greenhouse gas emission rules, said Representative Eric Burleson, Republican from Missouri, at the hearing on the DOT's regulatory agenda. He continues to say, do you think these regulations have been made based on congressional intent? That question was asked to Louis Pugh. Pugh says, I don't. I think certain folks want these kinds of things, whether it's to take away a small business's advantage to make a profit, like the speed limiter rule that will put small carriers at a competitive disadvantage to large carriers. I think much of this comes from special interest groups who may not have any experience with commercial trucking. Representative Mike Collins, who is a Republican from Georgia and a truck company owner, raised the issue of fraud among towing companies that service heavy trucks. Collins said such companies have been, quote, ripping off the trucking industry for decades, end quote. Asked by Collins for his comment, Pugh said an OIDA member recently received a towing bill in Pennsylvania that tacked on a $9,000, quote, heat and humidity surcharge and a 10% administration fee, and a towing bill that amounted to over $60,000. FMCSA earlier this year filed comments with the Federal Trade Commission in support of efforts to crack down on tow company price gouging against motor carriers. So listen, all of this in concert with one another is good, okay? Because what we've got here is we've got lawmakers that are saying, we've had these laws in place since 1938. This legislation is antiquated. It doesn't work anymore. Let's at least talk about it. The overturning of the Chevron doctrine, or the Chevron rule, whatever you want to call it, is definitely going to open the door for that type of thing. But we have to remember something here. One of the reasons that these kind of wide-sweeping laws get made in the first place is because of lobbyist money. And these special interest groups that were mentioned as people that might want these things really need to have a light shown upon them, because people that might, quote, want these things don't necessarily mean anybody that's involved with the trucking industry. It could be the tobacco industry lobby that wants the speed limiter rule because it means that you're going to spend more time on the road and smoke more cigarettes. It could be that far out of line. And I think that's a really important thing to keep in mind when you hear lawmakers doing lawmaker things. These guys are talking in these hearings, and they're putting this stuff on the record, which is really good. The things that you don't see are the trips out to tropical islands that these lobbyists will take lawmakers on and glad hand them and feed them opulent meals and put them on yachts and just put them up as a kindness. Oh, I'm just being a nice person. But what I really want you to do is fly in the face of all your constituents and make a law that will further burden the trucking industry so that my industry, whatever that may be, gets a leg up. This is our problem with politics. This is big money in politics, and you see it in every single shade of politics that we get to see as American citizens. It's a problem, and listen, I hope that we can start moving things in the right direction, but hope in one hand, and I guess grab a handful of sand in the other and see which one of them fills up first. That's not how the original saying goes, but I think those of you out there that have heard me say it before understand that, hope can be a little bit of a false positive from time to time. So we'll keep you updated on this. Anything else we see. We're heading over to transport topics for this next one. The headline reads, truckers with dogs returning from outside the U.S. need a new form. Now, I don't think, or at least I haven't heard of many H&M trucks heading north of the border or south of the border, but I figured I would include this just in case, because I don't know all the routes. I don't know where you guys are going or coming from. This could be important to you if you have to cross out of the country and you've got a furry friend riding shotgun with you. Truckers who take their dogs back and forth between the United States and either Canada or Mexico will soon be required to complete a federal form that asserts their pets are at low risk of carrying rabies back into the country. Starting August 1st, the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, as a part of the rabies prevention measure, will require that all dogs crossing into the U.S. be accompanied by the new dog import form. All dogs entering the U.S. after that date must also have a microchip and be over 6 months of age. It's very important. The requirements were included in a 123-page rule issued May 13th called Control of Communicable Diseases, Foreign Quarantine, Importation of Dogs and Cats. The U.S. Customs and Border Protection Office has issued numerous advisories since June from field offices near the borders of both countries regarding the CDC dog importation requirements. On July 22nd, the CDC, in response to new questions from Transport Topics, detailed how the rule affects truck drivers who travel with pets. Here's a quote. The CDC has clarified and simplified the process for bringing dogs into the United States from rabies-free and low-risk dog rabies countries. CDC aims to protect the health of U.S. communities and animals and prevent the reintroduction of dog rabies to the United States. These updates incorporate the feedback received from the public, industry partners, and various countries on the dog importation rule and clarify and simplify processes for bringing those dogs from dog rabies-free or low-risk countries. That was a mouthful. I think what I'll say here is suffice it to say, I know that a lot of you drivers, or most of, I can even say, drivers that roll with pets, that pet means everything to them. It is the world to you. It is literally your ride or die. And so a lot of you will already have those pets microchipped. A lot of you will already have those pets vaccinated for things like rabies and parvo. And that's just because you love your pet so much that you're going to keep up on its health as if it was a child or a member of the family. So I'm hoping if there are any H&M drivers that are crossing the border south or north, you've already got your dog up on all this stuff. But if you don't, it's very important to remember to do this before you cross, because there is, I think, an instance here where your dog doesn't get let back in if you don't have the dog import form filled out. So make sure that you get a hold of one of those things if you're going to be crossing the border. The next one and our last one comes from Transport Topics as well, and it's good news, so I'm going to cue up the applause because obviously anytime this type of news breaks, we get excited about it. However, it's not the most exciting news we've ever heard, but it's still good. The headline reads, diesel price sheds 4.7 cents and drops to $3.77 per gallon. That is, of course, the national average diesel price, dipping 4.7 cents, according to Energy Information Administration data released July 22nd. Diesel's national average price has dropped in each of the past 2 weeks, totaling 8.6 cents after 4 consecutive increases. A gallon of diesel now costs 12.6 cents less than it did at this time in 2023. Love to hear that. Diesel's average price declined in all 10 regions of EIA's weekly survey from a high of 9 cents along the Gulf Coast to just 0.6 of a cent in the Central Atlantic. So there you go. There's your bell curve. It only went down 0.6 of a cent in the Central, or 0.6 of a cent in the Central Atlantic, but we dropped almost 9 cents along the Gulf Coast. Those two areas aren't that far from one another when you consider how big the United States is. So that's very interesting. The national average price for a gallon of gasoline declined 2.5 cents to $3.47. Excuse me. That's 12.5 cents less than it cost at this time a year ago. So gas down 12.5 cents, diesel down 12.6 cents year over year. Moving in the right direction here. Like I said, not the best news that we've ever heard, but moving in the right direction. It's looking like. Let's concentrate on the Midwest here, since that's where Omaha's at. On the 8th of July, we were at $3.80 a gallon. The 15th of July, we went down to $3.74 a gallon, and on the 22nd, we were at $3.73 a gallon. Over year, we're down 8 cents in the Midwest from where we were this time in 2023. And, of course, change from a week ago, we're down 1 cent. So it's nothing that you're really going to see out there on the pump. But overall, trending in the right direction for diesel prices. And I can't tell you how much that excites me. Just looking forward to seeing more articles like this in the future. I will throw the applause. I'll blow the party horns. I'll do it all, okay? You want an eagle screech? Well, I don't have that one pulled up right now, so we can't have it. But just know, that I'll keep you updated on this as well. Okay, it's time to put all the breaking news behind us. It's time to get on to safety with Dean and Dale. I'm looking forward to this conversation. It's coming up right now.
From Omaha, Nebraska, to whatever lane you're driving, this is the H&M Trucking Podcast with your host, Marcus Bridges.
All right, Denny, sometimes on this podcast, you and I in the past have had our hands slapped, most notably for the You Can't Make This Stuff Up episode that just ran. Now, there was a kind of a phantom hand slapping there. We made it through editing, but it's time for us to not be the ones that get our hands slapped a little bit, Denny. We've brought on a couple of great guests that we've had on this podcast before, and they are not going to concern themselves with the misgivings of you and me today. We're going to talk about speeding amongst the H&M drivers because there's been a bit too much of it. So please welcome to the show. I've got Executive Vice President Dale Cook on the line. Dale, thanks for being back with us. Always a pleasure to have you.
Great to be here.
And also, I've got Safety Manager Dean Edmunds here. Dean, welcome back to the show. Thanks for the time.
Thank you. Excited to be here.
Well, now, is that a little bit tongue-in-cheek here? Because I know this isn't going to be the most fun conversation that we've had, Dean, because I understand there's been a few more violations than what we would like to see as of late.
Yeah, you are correct. But, if you turn a blind eye to it, all it's going to do is get worse. So
I thought y'all were doing better.
We've had a not so good of a month. You know what happened, Denny? Summer showed up. Okay?
Yeah. That'll happen.
Historically or traditionally last year, he looked back from last July and we were dancing in the streets because everything was so good last July. And then this July, boy, I guess we should have got in front of this because it just exploded on us. So Dean can share numbers.
Absolutely. And Dean, you've put together some extensive numbers here where we can look through and kind of figure out where these violations are happening. And, it's funny that you say that, Dale. It's always hard in the face of a good month to prepare for the worst month or a bad month to follow it. You think, build on this. Let's do better next month than we did last month. But, this is one of those things I think we just are going to always be continuing to talk about on this podcast because it's very important. Let's not forget that speeding puts everybody in danger, yourself, the cargo, everybody else on the road included. So it's always a good idea to have these conversations. Dean, let's jump into the numbers here. What do you have for us?
Well, so far this month, we're looking at, I would say, at least 4 violations that are being noted, 6 to 10 miles an hour. And we got a couple of drivers that have been in the 11 to 14 range, which is, dancing close to that 15 over, which a lot of times gets looked at as a serious moving violation, which could be big problems for the drivers later on.
Sure. Now, when we were talking with Eve in the lead up to this episode, one thing that she'd mentioned to me is that, we still have our fair share of the 6 to 10 over, but the ones that really matter are the ones that are hitting us hard, like the 11 to 14. Can you talk about the difference in points between those two levels and what the difference means to H&M as a company between going 6 to 10 over and 11 to 14 over?
Sure. When you look at the CSA scores, the way they weight the violations is they give more of a impact to more recent violations. So if you receive, for an instance, a 11 to 14 mile an hour speeding violation, for the first 6 months that it sits on our CSA score, instead of being the 7-point violation that it is, it's multiplied by 3. So it actually hits our score with 21 points per violation. And then consequently, your 6 to 10 mile an hour violations are like a 4-point violation. When you multiply it by 3, it hits us for 12 points. Now, that weight system does start to back off. After a violation is entered its 7th month, up to the year mark, it's held at double the points that is originally assigned to that violation. Then the final 1 year that it's on our on our scorecard, it's worth the original point value. So like these 21 point violations, they're going to start out at 21 points. And then after 6 months, they'll be valued at 14 points. And then at the year mark, they'll fall down to 7.
So it's important to remember that first quarter of the time that is going to be, that particular violation is going to be on your CSA score. It's a real heartbreaker. I mean, that's a big weighted chunk of points there for those first 6 months. You pile up 2 or 3 of those in the same month. What does it mean for the CSA score?
It impacts it hard. For instance, Dale mentioned earlier, when we looked at the numbers from a year ago, we only added 30 points for the entire company to our unsafe driving score. Well, these 3 speeding violations, or these speeding violations that I'm looking at, add up almost 75 points between the group of them. Wow. So, I mean, we added twice as many, 2.5 times more points than we did a year ago at this time.
That's really like the difference between being, the threshold. Of course, we look at that, which is 60 on the CSA scoring. When you get that several of them together, Marcus, all of a sudden you're just running at that mark or higher. And if you only have a short month, like 30 points, like we had, or 38, whatever it was for a year ago, July, well, then you're at 30 instead of 60. It just kind of cuts it in half. It also measures you against your peers, so it does depend a little bit on what the other guys are doing. But overall, we're performing below the market. If we were taking the basic skills test you took in school, the good thing is to be down at the bottom, not at 100, okay? And it's making it more difficult when we have more and more of them that accumulate. It's the accumulation. It's not the one bad month. It's the several months in a row that can really jump you back over the threshold. When you get back over the threshold, there are lots of problems for us. We risk an audit from the DOT, which slows us down. No matter how well we're prepared, it slows us down. You risk customer loss. Customers, all of a sudden, if you start getting especially if you get two categories that are outside those thresholds, they'll pull you from their qualified carrier list. So you have to be cautious and pay attention to these things, or it can create great difficulty for us company-wide.
Sure. It sounds like it has a bit of a ripple effect, and as the speed gets higher, the bigger the ripple effect and the longer it lasts. Denny, I know that you kept your nose clean. At least you like to brag about that from time to time here on the show when it came to speeding. But what are your thoughts here?
Well, first question that pops into my mind is, if you were to terminate the people that are the problem, do you get any points back or any consideration for that? Because I never knew what happened from that end.
Yeah, no, unfortunately, once a driver for our company receives a violation, it's our violation until it runs off that 2-year mark. So, us terminating a driver because of a bad inspection or a bad speeding violation, doesn't benefit us in the CSA realm so very much at all.
I see.
Well, that answers that.
It was designed so you can't go and fire a bunch of drivers and clean up your CSA score and then start all over again. So, if it happens under your watch, it's on your scorecard.
Yeah, if you gotta raise that little 2-year-old baby and just take it on the chin for all 24 months on your CSA score. And really, I just my opinion here, which put that together with 50 cents and you won't buy a cold cup of coffee, but that's probably a good thing, because you don't want drivers fleets doing these wide sweeping firing hauls just to adjust their CSA score, then maybe putting a bunch of underqualified drivers back in those spots. Their score dips again. They go through and fire all the drivers. It's not really, at that point, a driving issue. It's a training issue, I would think. So am I on the right track there?
Yeah, very much so. And, on the same token, is if we go to hire a driver, if he had a speeding violation 6 months ago, we don't pick up those points if we hire somebody that's had that one violation or whatever in their past.
Yeah, I'm going to kind of shift gears a little bit. You talked about terminating, or how do you get rid of them, and I think the reaction across the industry is basically the same. You sometimes live with the girl you brought to the dance, right? Feel like they do everything else a little bit better, and you can kind of live with that violation here and there. You have to react much more strongly when they get a second one or a third one. Okay, that's when that's when you look at that termination. But I'm going to go back a few years, and I won't name the name of the company, but let's just say their trucks are blue. They here in this area, and they actually put in a policy when they had real trouble, and it was a fear factor kind of thing or a scare tactic. If you got a speeding ticket and you were going more than 10 over, you got fired. Okay, and they just put it out company wide. We've never wanted to take that approach, because all of a sudden you get a 15-year driver, 10-year driver, and you got to treat them all the same if you put that kind of policy out there. And that's why we just kind of try and continue to educate. And when our guys get into a little bit of stuff, you got to stand behind them a little bit. And that's important to us with our culture. When you're big, in a large carrier, sometimes, personalities don't mean much. Your truck number is now terminated. That approach is something we hope we never have to go to, but, it gets a little scary. You can't, when we've been, really 2 years, Dean, or longer, where we struggle with our CSA scoring on the unsafe driving. What can we do different? We put in all these policies, which Dean shared with you, I think, on the email and his notes. He did a great job with this. I told him that myself. But, you look at this situation where we've used to be our punishment was we said, don't do it, okay, or hey, knock it off. We've now got to the point where we've escalated that from just a plain old coaching of the driver to, giving them either verbals or probations and taking away bonus money, and tried to make it tougher to make them think more about the speeds that they're traveling. We've had good results for a while, but now we've had this little, all of a sudden we're back under thresholds. And then what have we been under threshold, Dean? 2 or 3 months? And then I bet you at the end of this month, we ain't under threshold anymore. Okay. Those scores are super important, and they impact what we're able to do with our customer base. So we've got to continue to educate our drivers. And hopefully that's what this podcast is doing today.
Yeah, we hope so. We would love it if this podcast gets the message out to the right ears. And I did want to talk a little bit about specifics, Dean, because you put together this great document for us. And I know Denny and I have both been doing our homeworks, but let's talk a little bit about the company policy for speeding violations here. Dale mentioned it a little bit, probation, loss of bonus. But Dean, can you get a little bit more specific with us as far as to what will cost you and how long it'll cost you if you get caught speeding?
Well, yeah, like I said, we've kind of kicked the horse a couple of times here. We've talked about probation for 12 months for speeding. We've talked about lots of bonus. When you go on probation, you lose your bonus for 3 months. That's a good chunk of change for most drivers out there. The other piece of the puzzle is we do turn the truck down for a period of time. We turn the maximum speed down from 70 to 65. And the duration of that turn down depends on the violation. If it's say, for instance, it's a 6 to 10 mile an hour, we turn it down for 60 days. If it's 11 mile an hour or over, we turn it down for 90 days. And the same goes for if the speeding violation is in a construction zone. It's 90 days. I kind of mirrored the severity of the punishment along with the severity of the CSA point system. So the sections or the categories are very much the same. And as you elevate or go up in those categories, you're going up in your disciplinary action.
Sure. Now, Denny, I want to get your thoughts on this because we talked to so many drivers on this show, and, recently we've talked a little bit about speed limiter legislation that's being floated, and we've heard whispers from our federal government about some people that want it capped as low as 60 miles an hour, and there's nothing that makes a driver more red in the face than talking about a 60 mile an hour speed limiter. This kind of is in the same vein. If you get caught speeding, you're going to see an effect on your truck speed limit. So as a former driver yourself, what does the logic of the situation kind of tell you here, Denny?
Well, you got to spank them on the hand somehow, and that's a good way to do it. I will say one of the frustrations, we brought up construction zones, and I am all for safety and the safety of the workers. But the thing is, they'll stake out, 20 miles and call it a construction zone, and you drive through it day after day, month after month, and they're not doing a damn thing. I realize that can't affect company policy. If you get nailed and you get caught, yeah, they have the, the policies, but it's just frustrating because there's so many, there's nothing going on. They just got the barrels out and the speed limit down to 45 miles an hour. And so I can see the temptation because everybody else is flying down that road. I-24 going through Kentucky was a good example. There was probably a 30, 40-mile construction zone that they weren't working on it. They were rarely ever working on it. And I travel that road a lot. But anyway, now I'll quit bitching.
Well, no, I think it comes to something else that we've talked about here on the podcast, Denny, and I don't think it's bitching as much as it is if we share these frustrations and people understand that other people have dealt with them before, maybe just talking about them can help people navigate dealing with them currently. And one thing that you were big on, Denny, was trip planning. You've told us on this podcast many times, you were very much a stickler for trip planning. And if you know that 20-mile construction zone is there, frustrating or not, at least you can plan for it and still make your times.
Yeah. Or plan a detour. I found an alternate route in Kentucky when they actually were working on that road. It was about the same mileage and I got around it. Yeah, it was a 2-lane road. Well, a lot of it was 4-lane. But anyway, yeah, like you said, trip planning, if you can avoid the construction zones, always a plus.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's just talk about the safety surrounding this issue in general here. Dale and Dean, I'll go to either one of you guys here that want to take this, but can we talk about a little bit? You've got a numbered list here, Dean, that's kind of talking about all the increased dangers when it comes to commercial motor vehicles and speeding. Can you just take us through that a little bit and talk to us about the general safety of keeping a safe speed?
Well, sure. When you start looking at increased speed, it increases the opportunity for a serious truck accident. Obviously, when you're going faster, your reaction time starts to diminish. So things like rear-end collisions, jackknifes, high-speed impacts, all those things tend to increase, as well as head-on crashes. Somebody could come across the lane because of your speed that you're going. You have less time to react to it. Or even, catching lights as they turn from one color, they turn from green to yellow to red. If you're going fast, you're going faster than the road conditions allow. Then you're running the risk of putting yourself in the middle of that intersection, making contact with somebody else. And of course, when you're talking about accidents, more momentum, more inertia causes more severity and injuries. Mm-hmm. We could even push something into the fatality category where none of us want to look at or even talk about because it's just a scary thing to think about that, in 2022, for instance, they have 11,000 crashes listed as speeding as being the main factor of what caused those crashes. And nearly 22% of those crashes where speeding was involved were crashes involving large trucks. And, that's exactly where we don't want to be. We want to stay away from that. We want to keep everybody safe, get everybody home for their vacations and home time and holiday events. So, it's a scary thing.
100% it is. And I want to break that number down a little bit there that you just gave us, Dean. 11,000 fatal crashes. I feel like sometimes when we look at the course of a year and we hear a number like 11,000, we don't really associate that because a year is a long time. It's hard to look at in just one blink. And 11,000, if you saw 11,000 of something sitting in front of you, if it was coffee grounds, it might fit in your hand. And if it was large boulders, you couldn't even fit it within, a giant swimming pool. But let me give you a little bit of a better number here to assess. This is 30 fatal accidents per day of the year where speeding is a contributing factor. You break that down, you think, okay, well, what if there was one in each state? We're knocking out 2/3 of the states here with a fatal accident. It really gets more terrifying the more you break it down. And when we say 20% of that number involves trucks, that's a big chunk, and that's really scary. You said it. We don't like to talk about it, but it is an aspect of the work that's done at H&M Trucking and every other trucking fleet every single day of the year. So while we don't like to think about it, it is smart to take a minute and step back once in a while and really understand what just 10 miles an hour over the speed limit could do to the situation at hand.
Yep. And something to make this number a little more real, if you think about those 30, those accidents the number that you're given, not every accident had just one person that passed away in it. You're starting to talk about 2 or 3 occupants. Very quickly, you're looking at the attendance at a basketball, at a professional basketball game, baseball game. You got 60,000 people that are no longer here because of speeding and fatal accidents.
Yeah, it really makes, Denny, I see you shaking your head. I know that as a former driver, that type of thing just makes your spine quiver, because you think about all the people that that have been involved in an accident, whether it had a fatality or not, and you think about how that kind of rattles you for your next day at work. Can you talk a little bit about that and the effect that it had on you hearing about an accident like this, or maybe just knowing that these numbers are as serious as they are?
Well, from the very first time I climbed up in a truck and got behind the wheel, my biggest fear from that day till the day I stopped driving and retired was that I would hurt somebody innocently. You get aggressive drivers and they make you mad and you think, well, they deserve it or whatever, maybe in your anger. But, who knows? They may have a baby in the back seat. That's always the thought I try to keep in my mind, is even if this guy's making me mad, even if he deserves whatever he gets, it could be somebody in the car with him. It could cause me to swerve and hit another car. I mean, I always try to go, okay, just take a breath, back off, take it easy. Because that was my biggest fear, that, and, coming down a steep grade out in the West, coming off the Rockies, off of Cabbage Hill or something. I don't want to let that truck get out of my control and run over somebody, because they don't get it. They'll pass you and pull right in front of you. And so, like I said, every day that I drove, that was my biggest fear. My biggest concern was that I would hurt somebody, that, an innocent being out there, not just kill, but hurt. So you got to keep that top of mind.
Absolutely.
I just wanted to kind of add to Denny, he gave us a little bit of that emotional aspect of driving. Okay. The people that make you mad around you. I think all of us are married or have been married. Okay. Have you ever followed your wife home from a restaurant where you're running 2 cars together, or the grocery store or a funeral or wherever you happen to be? And you see, I can ignore the traffic that's bothering me in general. But when I see somebody race past, I'm following my wife, and then they cut her off right in front of her, or they get up and tailgate her butt, oh, do I get to fuming? I can generally put up with it when I see that. And you have to pretend like, when I'm following my wife, am I going to tailgate her or do anything dangerous to her when that's your loved one? Everybody's somebody's loved one. And if people would have respect when they're driving and just think emotionally, about what you just said, Denny said, you don't want to hurt anybody. But imagine if that's your wife or your child or your, I don't know, your grandma or your grandpa, depending on where you're at in life. That older person driving down the road that's going a little slower. You know how badly people hate to get behind them and they tailgate them and then swerve around them. They all want to be going faster. And that person 90% of the time is just driving the speed limit. Okay. But older people sometimes drive a little slower. Sometimes, certain ladies they're not quite as confident a driver. So they get in somebody's way and it ticks them off. And that's just hard emotionally for me to understand why people can't have a little more consideration for those around them from the emotional side of the speeding. And when you have an 80,000 pound killing machine, right, Denny? 80,000 pounds of killing, it will tear through several cars and hardly put a dent in the truck, right? Especially when you got a deer guard on. It will do damage. And if you lose control of that vehicle, a commercial motor vehicle, it is much more dangerous than losing track of your, 4-door sedan. Okay. Down hills, all the things that Denny mentioned. man, that hits me right in the gut, to think people are not considerate of those around them. They're just in a damn hurry to get to where they want to be. And worst case scenario, it's a truck driver that thinks he can get a few more miles in today. Okay.
Yeah. And kind of talking about this a lot of times too, most drivers always have a good sense or a good confidence in their abilities as a driver. And those are the type of drivers that we put on the road. But the problem is the other vehicles on the road. Our driver could be doing everything right. But if someone else is on their phone or trying to do something on their navigation system and they roll through a stop sign, there they are right in front of a truck that can't slow down and can't stop fast enough. And then there's also even the equipment. This equipment's designed, it's built very well to be on the road to drive, 500,000 miles, or all the warranties are 500,000 miles. So they expect the truck to be good for that kind of time frame. But things like tires, for instance, if you talk to a tire salesman, anybody that represents a tire company, they'll tell you that those tires on them trucks are not speed rated for anything above 65, 75 mile an hour, depending on the brand. So once you start to get into those higher speeds, you're driving beyond the capability of the equipment that you're in. And that's when things get dangerous.
Yeah, absolutely. Just, what is it, the line from Jurassic Park? You were so busy worried about if you could do 80 miles an hour that you didn't stop to think about whether or not you should do 80 miles an hour in that truck. And bringing the emotional part of this in, I think, Dale, like you did there, and Denny as well, and also Dean with these great numbers that you provided us here, it's very important. This podcast alone has shocked me over the course of the last year into being a much safer driver. And if you look at my safety record, I've got a couple of tickets, one speeding violation, one following too close. I've never been in an accident. I have a stellar safety record out on the road. And just through listening to this podcast and doing this podcast, I think that I have become twice, maybe 3 times more safe on the road. And I'm not one of those people that's out there driving 20 miles an hour below the speed limit. I'm thinking about my precious cargo all the time. This afternoon, I'm going to get in a car with my wife and my dogs and drive 7 hours across the state of Oregon. And the entire time I have my hands on that wheel, the only anger or vitriol that comes out of me will be from people doing stupid things around me because they are endangering my loved ones in the car. Has nothing to do with me, like what Dale said there. It's think about it outside of yourself a little bit and imagine it's your grandma or your wife or your child, anybody else besides the person that it is in that car or truck or van, whatever it is, and it will make you approach the situation differently. And I'm really glad that we brought this up, guys, because this is an important part of just thinking about all the reasons that we have to stay safe. That's a real big one. Somebody's loved one's in that car, could be your loved one. Keep it under the speed limit or at least at a safe speed that you're allowed to drive. There's one more factor here that I want to talk about before I let you guys go, because we've spent some time talking about fuel efficiency with you, Dale, on this podcast before. We've talked about fuel solutions and efficiency in the summer and idle times and all of that. But there's a part of fuel efficiency that comes along with these speeding violations as well. Just picking off of Dean's numbers here, for each 1 mile per hour increase in speed over 60 miles per hour, there is a 0.14 mile per gallon fall off in fuel efficiency. Dale, I imagine that gets worse as the speed goes up, correct?
Absolutely. It's interesting because we get a lot of things from our Samsara system, and one of those is we get the ability to look through, and if you see a guy with a poorer safety score who has harsh turns, harsh stops, his speeding levels, which we can measure, we get that from our system that says a driver is speeding, 22% of the time, and how much is severe and all those things. When you look at that driver who speeds more, his fuel mileage is less. It just goes hand in hand. It's not tricky. We probably all experienced this in our own vehicle. If you say you're going across, in your case, one of those Northwest states, but out here I'm going across to Iowa. My son went to school at Ames at Iowa State, okay? And when we drive to Iowa State, if you took the interstate and drove 75, you got much poorer fuel mileage than you did taking Highway 30 and driving 55. Even in a car, you'll notice the difference in your fuel mileage. Even when you have all those little small towns to slow down in, and you're speeding up and slowing down, you still get better fuel mileage taking that 2-lane sometimes than just charging down the interstate with high RPMs. So we're able to relate those things together and see them within our system. And, when we see a driver who's getting poor fuel mileage, it's not always just because of his idle time. Sometimes it's because of his driving style and his aggressiveness and his willingness to speed. So they all impact that fuel mileage, yes.
Yeah.
We actually, I'll mention, I don't know if Ted Willie's been on our program. Ted, when we first went from 70 to 68, okay, this has been years ago when we governed them down a little bit more when fuel first started to bubble up, 15 years ago, where it became a bigger factor. And Ted, as an experiment, he wouldn't go over 62 miles per hour. And he was, back when nobody was getting 8 miles per gallon, he was getting 8 miles per gallon. It's more regular now. Trucks are more efficient, of course, after through 3 or 4 generations of improvements. But he just slowed down to see how good it would, how well that would produce a good number for him. And then he'd always call and report to me, and I'd say, well, I wish I could get anybody else think that way, which I'm leading into something here. A lot of these drivers, because they get paid by the mile, right? It's this piecemeal world we live in, that they think if they have 10 hours of drive time and I can average 60 miles per hour, is that reasonable, Denny? 60 miles an hour for the day? Probably not. Probably still a little high. They start thinking that they're making much more money by driving faster, when in reality, if they were averaging 2.5 miles, less over a 10-hour period, 25 miles, 60 cents a mile, $12, $15 a day. Is a speeding ticket worth $12 or $15? They have to calculate that themselves. And some drivers will really take off on the idea that they want to cover as many miles as possible. Well, your logbook only allows so many for the month anyway. So I understand their efficiency thought, but by the same token, if you're speeding all the time and hurrying all the time, we all know if we're hurrying to try and get someplace, our attention is not as good as it should be on the roadway.
For sure. Denny, I'll field that question to you as a former driver. Would the 10 to 12 bucks a day versus 3 months of your bonuses getting taken away, what would you rather have?
Well, not only that, of course, that's a simple question to answer, but also if you push to the limit day after day after day, you're going to have to shut down and do a reset. And I could keep rolling. I found that average, that sweet spot where I could just keep driving. And I usually stayed out for about a month at a time, 4, maybe 5 weeks sometimes. And I rarely had to do a reset, which if I could be visiting family or something, that's one thing. But to just shut down for a day and a half and sit at a truck stop in the middle of nowhere, it does nothing for me. I would rather just work every day, 7 days a week. And so, yeah, you have to find that pace. And, what I did doesn't necessarily work for everybody, but I've known so many drivers that argued with me and told me what an idiot I was because I didn't push hard. I didn't try to get every hour and every mile in every day. But, some of it is just the fact that I didn't want to do the resets. Some of it's also my peace of mind. If I'm worried about a cop, finding me and giving me a ticket, it adds to my stress level. And I didn't want to be stressed.
Too blessed to be stressed, right, Denny?
Something like that.
Well, guys, all jokes aside here, I want to thank you both, Dean and Dale, for being here. In fact, I'll thank you too, Denny, my 3 Ds today. I appreciate all you guys coming on here because, sometimes we're going to have a little bit tougher conversations here on the podcast. And this one, I feel like for being one where we're trying to get everybody in line and trying to really let people know, I feel like there's a lot of good information here. There's none of this that you could look at as a speeding driver, in my opinion, and fight it with real logic. Everything here adds up to it's better for you to back off the speed. It's better for your safety. It's better for your fuel efficiency. It's better for your stress level. It's better for how much Dale and Dean smile at you when you walk in the terminal. All of these things, it's better for the CSA score. It is an important part of what we do every day here at H&M Trucking, and I just really appreciate you guys both coming on here and taking the time to have an extended discussion with this. I hope we can affect a little bit of positive change amongst the ranks at H&M Trucking.
Appreciate being here, Marcus. Appreciate being here. I agree with you 100%, Marcus. If we can affect one or two, we've done everything we needed to do today.
All right. Well, gentlemen, have a fantastic rest of your week. That's Safety Manager Dean Edmunds and, of course, Executive Vice President Dale Cook. Appreciate the time, fellas. We'll talk to you soon.
Take care. See you, Denny. See you guys.
See ya.
Great episode there. It's time to wrap this one up, and I don't have a lot of time here because we had a fantastic conversation there with Dale and Dean. It went even longer than I expected, and I can't thank those guys enough. I know that both of them have a lot going on each and every day at the H&M office, as well as everyone else that joins us from the office and drivers as well. Your time is greatly appreciated. I try to make that a very well-known thing on this podcast, but without you guys coming on and giving us the type of interview that Dean and Dale just gave us, man, this podcast gets boring fast. So really appreciate not only the expertise there from Dean and Dale and also the experience from Denny as he kind of fills in that role as if we had a driver sitting right there with us, it's Denny, and it really does help the podcast. So big thanks to everyone involved there. I hope that we can affect a little bit of change. Like we talked about right at the end there with Dean, this is something that's solvable. It's something that's probably better for everyone involved if we solve it sooner rather than later. And we don't want to see drivers lose their bonuses, man. I don't want to see you guys get governed to 65 miles an hour for any period of time for something that you could have prevented. And some really sage advice there from Dean talking about his driver that just self-governed down to 62, got better fuel mileage, ended up with better pay. All of these things are so important to what we do on a daily basis here, but safety is the number one point that we want to drive home here. We want all you drivers safe, getting home to your family safe, getting the load there safe, keeping everybody on the road there safe around you. You are the best drivers out there. We know that. At least we do on this podcast. And so, you know, from a lowly four-wheeler here, we definitely look to you truck drivers to help keep things safe out there on the road. And I will do my part and hopefully impart this to other four-wheelers that I know to give trucks room and to not tailgate them and to not drive like jerks around them and to not cut them off and to try to take care when merging and try to give them room. All these things that make it safer, I think we could all do a better job of when we're out there on America's highways and byways. So take that to heart and remember it. And hopefully we won't have to do another one of these speed episodes anytime soon. I think we were at speed 2 last time. Maybe we're at speed 3. This might even be speed 4. I'm taking what John Voight and Keanu Reeves and Sandra Bullock did so well with, and all the sequels failed miserably at doing. We are going to give you good sequels to these episodes whenever we can. So for this one, we hope that when we come back and revisit this later on down the road, we get to have a little bit more positive conversation. Stay safe out there, drivers. That's the order of the day. Keep the shiny side up, and as always, get some dude wipes. Stay fresh, cheese bags. And no, that wasn't actually a sponsored thing. I just thought that, dude wipes would help you stay fresh. So, do with that what you will. Bye now.
Thank you for listening to the H&M Trucking Podcast. Please leave a review, subscribe, and connect with Marcus over at the H&M Trucking social media channels. And if you're considering a job at H&M, find us at hmtrucking.com. Until next time, stay safe and ahead of the curve drivers.